16 November 1944, the Stolberg corridor, east of Aachen. The 7th Corps under J. Lawton Collins pushes 3rd Armored Division under Maurice Rose through wet factory streets, while LXXXI Corps under Friedrich Koechling orders 9th Panzer under Harold Freiherr von Elverfeldt to lock the crossings. An M4A3 from Combat Command B clears a corner and takes a round into the final drive. Track pops from the idler, and the hull dies against the curb. MG-42 tracers rake brick. The crew bails low behind twisted tram rails. White smoke folds down. An M32 recovery tank noses in steel snout, kissing a manhole rim. The hook bites, the winch howls, and the cripple slides free across an oil sheen, backing toward the forward bay of the 45th Armored Maintenance Battalion. Inside a tin-walled shop, the crane whispers a fresh GAA block, hangs on short chain, the final drive lies open like a split heart. Wrenches clap, bolts drop into a tray, belts pull tight. A hand lamp washes over wet steel, steam feathers from an open radiator. The hour hand jumps, not the calendar. Dawn lifts. The same tank grinds back into the same street engine, drier cadence, steadier infantry from the 104th keeps tight on its flanks, the turrets sweeping black windows. The German outpost that marked it down hears the tracks hiss across buried tram lines and hesitates. 2 blocks over another dead hull is hooked, stripped, swapped, and returned before the guard changes on a rooftop sentry. Wind threads a broken pane. Cooling armor ticks. The engine note drains into hush. On the corner where the crew ran, there is only the faint smell of hot oil and the soft drip of water from a road wheel. Then nothing. By mid-November 1944, the fight east of Aachen has narrowed to factory blocks, tram spurs and alleys, where a single gun can freeze a battalion. First Army wants the Ruhr Plain. 7th Corps must pry open Stolberg and Eschweiler and hold the door against counterpunches that arrive out of rain and rubble. The wager is tempo. If American armor disabled in a street fight sits for days, the line collapses into the rhythm. Germany prefers night probes, roadblocks and sudden guns at 10 paces. If a knocked-out tank returns before dusk, every local success dissolves before it can be exploited. Germany enters this week with fuel short, spares thin, and mechanics exhausted, but a familiar confidence remains. A Panther set on a long street owns the first shot. A Park 40 looking down a tram lane punishes anyone who shows a glacis. A single well-timed counterattack can send tired crews back to start. The belief underneath is simple: mobility kills by-days. Mark a Sherman as dead, and the map can rest while ambushes reset. Across the line, the American answer is not a talisman tank, but a procedure. 7 Corps ties recovery and repair into the maneuver net. M32s and wreckers are not rearward services, but frontline tools that move on the same radios as the rifle companies. Dragon wagons idle inside artillery range. At the forward bay of the 45th Armored Maintenance Battalion engine packs sit test-run final drives, lie open on stands, and tool carts are staged in the order. Hands will need them. A mobility kill triggers a clock, not a lament. Smoke hook, haul, swap, road test, return. The crew that ran from Sparks at noon can lean against familiar armor again by dawn. For the infantry guarding corners, the difference is visceral. Without the drill, a burned or broken hull becomes a landmark and a message. With it, the landmark disappears, and the message reverses the street that was quiet after a kill grows loud again before rations. German outposts that once wrote neat notes about a destroyed tank must scratch them out and move. Company leaders who planned to pace the day with one ambush find the day has no pace at all. The stakes reach beyond a block of row houses. First Army needs to keep pressure through winter weather that slows everything and favors defenders who know every turn of the tram lines. The repair tempo turns weather from a German ally into a neutral fact. The same rain that gums a track also muffles a tow chain. The same cold that bites a mechanic's fingers shortens the cooling time on a new block. Every hour saved in a bay becomes an hour added to the attack. On the German side, the cost of delay compounds. Each Panther that survives becomes too valuable to risk in daylight corners. Each set of final drive teeth that fails is a problem measured in days and miles the Luftwaffe cannot protect. What once felt like dominance turns into conservation. Firepower becomes something to be guarded, not used. The weak tightens like a rope. Tanks fall out and return until the old equation kill one by time no longer balances. The corridor does not wait for repairs. The repairs run with the corridor. The city blocks east of Aachen turn fighting into a geometry problem with blood in it. A Panther set at the far end of a tram line owns the first sight picture. Its 75 reaches down the straight like a thrown spear. A Pak 40 crouched behind a garage door waits for a belly plate, a sprocket, or the small square of final drive the gunner has learned to recognize as the soft place in American armor. On upper floors, a man with a Panzerfaust leans out a shattered window only when he sees a turret hesitate. None of this is myth. At 80 to 300 meters, the first steady sight wins, and the German script begins with making the other man lose. His feet cut a track, smash a drive, force the hull to stop under machine gun trace, then finish. The crew inside feels the kill as a sideways kick, a metallic scream through the deck, and the smell of hot oil when the radiator coughs. What the Germans cannot script is what happens next. In 7th Corps, the radio net treats a mobility kill as a clock start. White smoke hisses into the lane before the echoes die. An M32 recovery tank noses up with the patience of a shop foreman, armor, scarred cables coiled like steel snakes. The hook goes in the winch, hum rises, and the dead hull slides back across wet cobbles, clattering over sunken tram rails. A dragon wagon idles one street over, blocking out a doorway with its height. The ramp drops chains, snap tight, and the problem becomes a moving silhouette. The forward bay of the 45th Armored Maintenance Battalion sits little more than a long toe from the front. The place smells of cutting oil and wet wool, and the benches are already laid out for the job that arrives. A final drive case lies open on stands with shims laid by size. A fresh Ford GAA short block hangs from a short chain. The crane operator barely speaks. He watches fingers and eyes. A crew chief taps a wrench twice against a crossmember, and the hands around him move in the order they practiced the night before without a tank in the room. At 200 meters, the American gunner learns the same lesson the German did, but applied in a different loop. He learns that steady sight comes not only from optics and a good seat, but from the knowledge that if the world goes sideways, someone will pull his machine from the corner and make it whole again. He keeps the reticle on the vertical edge of a window frame, breathes once, and lets the trigger break. If the shot goes wrong and the hull lurches, he rides a wrecker's tow chain within the hour. That knowledge is not courage. It is the absence of panic. It holds a formation together when the first street goes cold. German strengths still bite. A long street can be a killing corridor, and a gun hidden at a tram crossing can put a round into the place where American armor is a hinge. MG-42 fire still nails men to stones and keeps a platoon from pushing a tow hard enough. But the limits grow in the same narrow spaces that make the weapons deadly. A Panther's turret sweep is majestic in a field, and clumsy between brick pillars. Reload rhythm falters when the commander alternates between hunting through a slit and checking a side alley where he expects the American to appear in panic and finds only blank smoke. Spares do not appear in a crate on the curb. A wounded heavy must be left to its luck. A damaged final drive is a letter to the rear that may not be read for days. A commander who once scheduled a daylight duel to stall the morning now walks his men at night. Across Stolberg, a second contact copies the first without drama. A Sherman throws a track crossing a rail slot and cuts itself in half in the worst place possible. A Pak cracks the sprocket, and the hull slumps. Smoke rises before anyone yells. The M32 parks with its glacis kissing a doorway, winch-out crew hunched. The tow path is pre-walked by infantry from the 104th, who have learned where a Panzerfaust can sit and where a basement door hides steps. The hull is out in minutes and on a lowboy before the clock hits the same hour mark as the last recovery. In the bay, a final drive slides into place with 2 men easing the weight and a third slipping the shim stack until feel not numbers, says the lash is right. The same tank runs a road test under blackout and returns to the map square where it died before the next watch change. For the Americans in the lane, the specifications are not numbers, but sensations. The moment the engine pack seats, the chain sing becomes a low-throat hum. The radiator throws one breath of steam and goes clear. The stick under the driver's right palm takes load without chatter. For the Germans across the street, the specification is a different sound, entirely tracks they were sure would not be heard again, hiss across the buried rails. A gun team that counted on a knocked-out landmark wakes to find the landmark has left and the angles they chose do not exist. The pattern repeats enough to become ordinary. If a tank dies, it moves. If it moves, it returns. If it returns, the Panther commander's calendar shrinks from days to hours. He still owns the first shot at the end of a long street, but the reward for that shot is no longer the gift of time. This is not an accident. This is repeatable. Morning squeezes grey light into the factory streets east of Aachen and turns the puddles into dull pewter. The first contact happens so close that the sound is more metal than thunder. A round finds the final drive on a Sherman as it noses past a row of broken windows. The hull jerks sideways, the track spits from the idler, and the nose kisses a curb hard enough to rattle teeth. Inside, the driver feels the steering levers go slack. The turret crew tastes hot brass and glycol as the radiator coughs. Outside MG, 42 lines comb the brick the white streaks of tracer, shaving brick dust into the air like flour. The commander does not swear. He says 3 words that are more habit than thought: smoke, dismount, cover. The loader shoulders the hatch open, and the crew drops into the stink of wet mortar and cordite. Tram rails lie like bones, slick with oil. A rifle squad from the 104th is already where they need to be, rifles poked into black windows. One man pulling a smoke canister ring with his teeth. The street goes white down, dense smoke folding rather than drifting in the cold. Someone on the net says mobility kills South Spur, and another voice answers M32, rolling with the same calm used to ask for bread. The M32 comes up slow and square scarred plate, showing where last week's shrapnel walked. The driver sights on a manhole rim, like a gunner sights on a target, planting the nose so the escape angle is already measured. The hook bites into the eye, welded for days. Like this, the cable bullies, the slack out of its own coils. The winch note climbs from throat to head. The dead hull crawls backward across cobbles that have known hooves, steam locomotives, and now this. The recovery crew talks in motions, not sentences. One keeps the cable line pitched above a curb. Another watches a second-story window where a Panzerfaust could appear. A third listens for the change in engine tone that means the load has decided to behave. The infantry listens too, not for music, but for the ticks in the sound that say the Germans are shifting fire. 50 rips a window frame into a spray of splinters as someone moves behind it. The cable sings. The cable stops singing. The wreck is around the corner, and the Dragon Wagon takes over taller than the storefront and blotting a doorway with its flank. Chains snatch the ramp squats, and the knocked-out tank becomes freight. The tow turns into a straight line, through places a street map pretends are simple. It smells of cutting oil in the bay and wet wool from coats hung on pegs. The forward shop of the 45th Armored Maintenance Battalion does not look like a sanctuary, but it is one. The crane operator folds his hands around a pendant and glides a fresh Ford GAA short block across a narrow aisle like a butcher moving a side of beef. The floor carries the scuff lines of yesterday's work. A final drive casing lies open on stands its interior, a question of shims measured by feel and sound rather than printed thickness. A mechanic with a pencil behind his ear taps a wrench twice against a crossmember and a second pair of hands appears without summons. The old pack comes out wet and heavy. The new one swings in with the chain whispering across a sheave. A hand lamp paints the skin of the block. Frost on the edges of the bay door smokes as someone opens it for a minute and slams it again to keep the warm air in. Bolts clink into a tray where another man's fingerprints have left a map of long days. The air is busy with small sounds and short breaths. Nobody asks when. The hour hand on a watch answers when enough movements have occurred in the right order. Across an alley and 2 floors above street level, a German gun crew in shirts darkened with sweat settles behind a park site and looks down a tram lane that seems to stretch into Belgium. The gun captain has done this since Kharkov. He is not old in years, but the act has aged him. He knows the rhythm watch for the American to appear, swing wide, show a plate in panic, then hold. Aim for the place where steel hides gears. Let the recoil do the rest. The shot that crippled the tank at the corner had the clean taste of a good decision. He rubbed a thumb along the sight mount, and thought about breakfast. Hours later, he hears tracks where there should be none. Not a single vehicle, but the particular sound of a familiar runner with a cleaner engine note, the warmth cut out of it, the cadence more regular. He takes a step to the loophole, and the moving shape confirms what his stomach has already told him: the dead has returned to life, and it is not a miracle, it is a schedule. He shifts the gun by hand, but the angle he had was built on the assumption that time would hold still. Time has moved. His crew drags the trail a handful of centimeters to clear the tongue of the street, and that handful is the difference between a setup and a scramble. In a Panther, one street over the commander balances on his seat frame and presses his forehead against rubber that a fitter glued in place in a different country long ago. He can see down the straight a narrow river of gleam, where puddles have learned to lie. He won the morning around into a place no man belonged, a smooth recoil, the exhilaration of a clean kill amid rubble. He expected quiet after that. A day's worth of quiet. Enough quiet to reset the trap twice more by dusk. Now the same silhouette eases back into view with a different gait. The flanking infantry holds tighter. 50 taps under a high window, the way a carpenter taps a nailhead to check for sink. The turret on the American tank does not swing in a searching hurry. It glides as if there is time. He feels something unfamiliar in his chest. It is not fear. It is subtraction. The world's odds are being reduced by factors he cannot see. He orders a shift, a house length back, and the driver obeys the gearbox, protesting a maneuver learned in the open and dragged into a corridor. He hears maybe the fatigue in his own voice when he says, "Hold fire." The gunner waits for a plate that does not appear. Smoke somewhere down the street behaves like a patient animal. The American crew that ran from a dead hull is now in the same hull again and strapped down for a road test under blackout. The driver feels the difference first. The stick takes the load without chatter. The engine sits on its mounts with a new weight, less vibration up through the hands. The commander keeps his words flat and brief. He names turns like a bomb aimer names waypoints. He marks a doorway with one short burst, not to kill a man but to warn a building. On the net, a recovery sergeant says run a backshift left, watch Fausts, and the words are not a pep talk, they are a path. The loader rubs a thumb along a feed tray and nods at nothing. The gunner's eye relaxes into the sight, and the sight answers with a steady picture on a vertical edge that looks like it will remain vertical for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a war in a room. The shot breaks, and the turret moves before the shell lands because the drill says move. 2 blocks away, another story repeats itself with minor variations like a theme. A Sherman's track slips into a tram slot, and the hull lurches hard enough to make a man bite his tongue. A pack team up a narrow staircase sends a round into the exposed sprocket and begins slewing the barrel for a finishing shot, but smoke off a grenade pitcher blossoms too quickly, heavy and low. The M32 kisses a doorway and parks where the walls make a funnel. The driver holds brake and throttle together to fix the angle. The hooker crawls into the white with the rope over his shoulder and a second man's hand on his back so he does not vanish. The cable takes strain. The tank moves. The platoon from the 104th steps forward, as if crossing a light in town, and puts rounds into places where a man could hide a tube. The enemy tries to scythe the towpath with a machine gun, and a battery upstream expresses an opinion with a handful of shells that tear brown coins out of building facades and drop them like confetti. A minute a man can count from memory passes, and the broken hull is around a corner where the parquet cannot see. By the time the rooftop sentry on a German blockhouse trades his watch strap with the next man, the same American tank is back where it fell. Inside, the Panther time compresses to breaths. The commander tastes cordite that is not his. He presses the throat mic and tells the gunner to hold a lane that no longer exists because the target has not only moved but unhappened. He considers moving again, and does so, making an angle that would have been pretty in a field, foolish in a street. The driver sweats without moving much. The radio is saying words that mean conserve rather than hunt. He hears a phrase about daylight corners that was not uttered last month. He understands, without admitting it, that a knocked-out enemy is worth less than before. He tells the loader to keep 1 round of high explosive within reach for a window where men with long tubes might be. He flinches when the building to his left takes artillery. He wants to live long enough for night. He wants the script to return. Back in the bay, the mechanic who set the lash on the final drive wipes his hands on waist and goes for water. He does not talk about victory. He does not care what badge the man on the other side wears. He cares that the chain did not snag, that the bearing temperature stayed sane on the test, that the belts took tension evenly, that the return authorization form has a line for his signature. The crew chief scratches a number in a grease pencil on a panel where someone else scratched another number an hour ago. The crane goes quiet. Then, the crane moves again. Another truck is already reversing toward the door. A man whose nails are black sets a tray of bolts in a pattern he has set 10,000 times on 10,000 days that feel like this. He is young and old at the same time. When a runner leaves, he wraps the pendant cable around a hook like a priest closing a book. For the rifleman, the difference is hard and simple. A dead tank used to be a boundary and a promise. You could diagram your afternoon around it. You could show a new man the safe angles with your fingertip in the dust on a hood. Now the boundary erases itself before cigarettes are passed around. A corner you named after a hull number must be renamed after something that will not drive away. You stop naming corners after tanks. You start naming them after things that cannot be repaired in an hour. On the net, voices remain short. Mobility kill. Smoke down. M32 rolling. Hook set. Winch. Move. Runner back. Shift left. Watch Fausts. The economy of words reduces the space where fear can breed. The Germans hear American brevity as a kind of insult, as if the universe does not require adjectives to describe what is happening. The American brevity is not contempt. It is an agreement that feelings can be tallied later and only if anyone feels like it. The old German strengths keep showing flashes of the reasons men once believed they were permanent. A long street still lets a high-velocity gun do holy work. A second-story team with a Panzer Faust still makes any man in a hatch feel naked. A machine gun still edits the map with lines nobody wants to cross. But the math underneath suffers. A Panther needs to live in order to be dreadful. A gun needs time after a kill to be a teacher. A landmark needs to remain a landmark to be a trap. When nothing remains long enough, dread becomes caution. Teaching becomes sprinting, traps become rumors. Afternoon thins toward a dirty sunset that never fully happens, because the clouds own the light. The Americans pull a damaged hull and send another back. The Germans check watch straps and scarf down cold bread. A company-level note circulates on the German side about avoiding daylight corner fights with American heavy tanks unless ambush is sure and route of withdrawal is marked. Words like preserve and economy, once used in quiet staff rooms, find their way into mouths that smell of cordite. The Panther commander that began the day a hunter spends the last hour of it listening more than looking, moving in smaller bites, asking for smoke in a voice that used to ask for blood. The tank that died first thing and came back before lunch now smells like hot oil and hope's absence. The crew has no hunger. They have a drill. Their knuckles have printed the steel like stamps. The infantry on their flanks has learned where a basement stair usually sits inside these particular types of buildings. The recovery driver considers the day a success if his cable did not fray and no one fell under a moving load. The mechanic judges it by how few bolts he dropped. A captain judges it by how many intersections changed color. No one judges it by stories. Stories can wait until the engine cools. Cooling armor ticks like a metronome at the end of a song that will be played again before dawn. Night comes without ceremony. The Panther backs far enough to pretend it planned to be there. The PA crew hauls down 2 flights with a barrel that was not meant for stares and curses in a rhythm that would make a decent marching song. The American bay turns its lights low to slits, so no bomber imagines it is a prize, and the men keep working by lamps that make lungs look like ghosts when they breathe. Radios mumble a last check. One voice says what it always says, runner back. Another voice replies in the tone of a man who has learned what that means and does not care to hear it again. The smoke that had folded into the street in the morning now lies in thin skeins that smell like damp felt. Somewhere a chain clinks because gravity has its habits too. The city sleeps in small pockets. The war does not. Orders move first because tempo is a decision before it is a movement. First Army insists the push through the factory belt cannot slip into a siege. Corps takes that requirement and rewires the front so maintenance lives inside the maneuver net instead of behind it. Division commanders put signatures under policies that make sense only if a tank returns the same day it dies. The effect at street level is simple to name and hard to achieve. A mobility kill, starts a timer, and everything from artillery smoke to a grease pencil mark is arranged to beat the clock. The recovery drill begins the moment a platoon leader says the words on the net. A fire direction center throws smoke where the street geometry says, "A Packer will see best." Infantry clear second-story angles with short bursts and grenades that roll and cough rather than shatter. An M32 picks a nose angle measured against a manhole and a curb lip. The driver stands on brake and throttle together so the hull will not wander when the winch starts to sing. The hookman does not look heroic. He looks at a shackle to confirm the pin is half a thread shy of home so it can be driven back out when hands are numb. A Dragon Wagon waits one corner deeper engine, rumbling within artillery range because distance is a luxury lost last week. Recovery and maneuver share radios and maps. The route from kill to bay is not invented in the smoke. It was walked at dusk by a sergeant and 2 privates who chalked arrows on the backs of shutters. The forward bay is a choice, not an accident. The 45th Armored Maintenance Battalion has dragged its nerve ends close enough to hear small arms fire because a shop that cannot hear contact cannot return runners before the guard changes. The bay holds what the fight needs in ready state's final drives, with shims matched by hand, not by paper. Engine packs that have already coughed and settled under a test stand. Radiators flushed and corked. Bins of belts and magnetos staged in the order hand's reach when they are tired. The crane operator knows the body language of men guiding a chain more than he knows their names. A crew chief keeps a ledger. But the more important record is the rhythm of the floor bolts into a tray with a certain frequency torque, achieved with a certain grunt, a hand lamp washing across metal at a certain speed when eyes are deciding, if a surface is right. The bay is not improvisation. It is a factory line pressed into a ruined block and told to breathe under shell splinters. The policies around the bay give time back to the front. Cannibalization is legal on contact, not taboo in a binder. If a final drive sits in a hull hit by fire, it becomes a donor if pulling and installing it will beat a shipment by a day. If a crew survives and a hull does not, the crew rides a reserve hull rather than sitting on crates while forms travel. Cross-level authority lives at division maintenance rather than waiting for a rear area clerk to stamp a line. The man who signs a return authorization also has the power to tell a wrecker to take from A and give to B, because the line out front needs B at 2 in the afternoon, not tomorrow. The network behind the bay is not glamorous, but it is the reason the bay can behave like a small factory. Division trains keep Class 9 moving in lumps that make sense for speed. Whole packs, whole drives, whole assemblies that do not ask a mechanic to rebuild bearing by bearing, while artillery lifts dust from his sleeves. The heavy trucks take roads that are bad and hours that are worse. They do it with the assumption that losses will be replaced because the factories that created the parts live in a different world of light and electricity. When a truck does not return, paperwork fills its place, and another truck, and another. The men who load pallets at the nodes talk about weather and cargo and nothing else. Every piece moves to feed the clock that started at a corner where a tank died. Doctrine adjusts to the machine it now possesses. After-action notes are written in the short, ugly sentences of men who hate adjectives. Do not circle fight. Acquire first and relocate. Smoke on contact. Infantry to upper floors on recovery routes. Gun teams suppress probable Faust windows during tow, not after. Artillery observers mark angles by building type and tram pole count rather than by grid alone. The habits move from paper to speech to bone. A platoon hears the words "runner back" and shifts left without a debate because the words led to a tank reappearing twice last week before dusk. The German system facing this is sharp at the tip and hollow in the shaft. A Panther can still cut a street in half with one good shot. A Pak 40 on a second floor can still turn a corner into wreckage. But a damaged final drive in a Panther is a messenger that must travel by rail to a place where parts exist, and the rail does not always run. A wrecker cannot sit within American artillery and work under smoke. A German recovery team needs time and luck to use darkness, and darkness is shorter than it was. Smoke is a precious resource, not a planned step. When a heavy goes lame, a commander must decide between a daylight risk that could lose an irreplaceable asset and a night gamble that could lose men to ambush, as well as machines to ditches. The calculation pushes toward preservation. Preservation is not pressure. At company and battalion, the language changes. The notes that once celebrated a clean corner kill begin to carry warnings about daylight duels in narrow streets, about avoiding set-piece stands, unless ambush is assured and exit marked. The word preserve appears where the word hunt used to live. An officer edits a template that used to assume a knocked-out enemy tank would function as a fixed obstacle and a morale token. He crosses out a sentence that depended on the corpse remaining. He cannot tell his men that a dead thing will stay dead. He can tell them to mine better and move more quietly, which is not the same thing. On the American side, a different set of edits turns reaction into standard operating procedure. The artillery allocation matrix gives smoke priority on mobility, kills without a call up the ladder. The infantry checklists add 2 lines nobody thought to formalize before, one about stairwell clearing on tow routes, one about cellar doors that open toward alleys where wreckers might pass. Engineer teams carry enough rail wedges to keep a tank from losing a track to a slot on the way out. A maintenance lieutenant briefs his people on a final drive lash technique that saves 3 minutes when fingers are numb. 3 minutes means something, because a gun on the second floor can traverse in less than 3 seconds. The human economy of the American system is not cheap, but it is designed. Mechanics are trained to work by sensation because numbers on a chart do not help when hands are cold and the light is bad. Drivers and hookmen rehearse signals until a nod and a palm are enough in smoke. Ordnance officers are chosen for their ability to say yes to a messy solution rather than no to a neat risk. Platoon leaders accept that their maps will not keep names for long because the battle erases memorials faster than men can invent them. The calm required to live here comes from believing that if something breaks, it will be pulled, swapped and returned before the feeling of being less can spread. Factories thousands of miles away set the tempo without knowing the street names. Power packs arrive in crates that a man can open with a bar and a curse and install with a crane that was never meant to be this close to incoming. Final drives come with the right bolts in the right bags, and someone at a plant cared enough to stamp a part number where greasy fingers will find it. That care saves seconds each time and minutes across the day. The men in the bay do not toast the plant. They do not know the names of the towns where people poured these casings. They know that the paper band around a magneto coil comes off cleanly even when the knife is dull, and that means the knife can be used you know where when you know what happens. The chain of competence runs backward along roads and rails that no single mind can see, but it arrives at the right rhythm. Across the line, the German factories are still capable of beauty, but not of rhythm. A Panther rolling out of a hall is an argument for craft thickness and range. It is not an argument for replacement. A final drive is a precision cluster of teeth trapped inside a war that has lost needles and oil. A crew that nurses a runner through a week does so with the knowledge that the next failure may end the machine's participation not for an hour, but for good. That knowledge pushes commanders to save rather than spend, to guard rather than challenge, to write orders that leak fear into words like economy, conservation, and husband. The tactical effect is negative pressure. The absence of action is not the same as a defense. Inside the American Bay, a lieutenant signs a return authorization with a stub of pencil on a form softened by damp. His signature is not a ceremony. It is a conveyor belt bump. He walks the line and asks a question once, not what happened out there, but how long on this one. The answer comes in a second language, made of sounds, the scrape of a gasket seat, the strain note of a winch, the click of a torque wrench, the sudden quiet when a chain goes slack, because weight is where it belongs. A sergeant calls out a plate number and a street name, as if he were calling a taxi. A driver repeats it. The crane moves. The door opens to a brief razor of cold air and closes again. If a shell falls nearby, the men pause only as long as it takes to process that none of the lamps broke. On the German side, a company commander receives guidance that reads like an apology. Avoid exposure of heavy armor in daylight urban corners. unless ambush conditions guaranteed. Consider alternative use of heavy weapons as mobile reserves in depth. Preserve trained crews. He understands the intent, and he hates the taste. He tells his men to move positions after a single round to aim lower. On the first shot to guarantee a mobility kill to break contact as soon as smoke appears. Because smoke now means a tow, and a tow now means a return. He tells them to mine intersections more, to leave behind nothing but footprints. He knows this is retreat, written as prudence. The hour-by-hour ledger proves which doctrine can be afforded. A knocked-out American hull becomes a runner by afternoon, and the squad that fled under Tracer returns to the same doorway with different eyes. A damaged German heavy becomes a problem for night, and then for a train, and then for wishful thinking. The American bay sets a metronome, the street begins to hear. The German map, once annotated with precise notes about destroyed enemy tanks used as fixed obstacles, loses the confidence to write such notes in ink. Pencil lines smudge under rain and hands. The voice on the radio that says "runner back" speaks in the tone of a man calling a bus stop. He does not expect applause or even acknowledgement beyond the movement that follows. The platoon shifts left. The infantry checks for Fausts. The bay lines up the next job. A gun section on the far end of town hears about it second-hand and smiles into a scarf. In a Panther cupola, a man stares at his own fingers because they are shaking very slightly, and he wants to understand whether it is cold or something else. In a park team's hide, a gunner yanks a shell from a case and feels the small ache in his shoulder that tells him he is tired of stairs. By the end of the week, nothing looks dramatic and everything is different. The American line of maintenance officers is shorter because they stand closer. The German line of heavy tanks is shorter because they stand farther back. The American drill has learned to eat 3 minutes out of a job and enjoy the taste. The German drill has learned to add 3 minutes to a move and wonder if the addition will be noticed by artillery. Men on one side say less and do more. Men on the other side plan more and show less. The same guns remain the same, streets the same rails that bite at tracks. The geometry is unchanged. Only the time inside the geometry has been altered, and time is the quietest weapon on the field. America fights like an assembly line. Germany fights like a curator. The attack does not wait for repairs. Repairs keep pace with the attack. Morning myths die quietly. The first to go is the idea that a clean mobility kill buys days. A Panther at the end of a long tram line punches around through steel and gears and feels the old calm rise in his throat. The street will be his until darkness. A pack team, a block over, crosses the same thought off with a smile. They used to be right. They wait for silence to settle and for American infantry to shape their next hours around the black carcass at the corner. Instead, white smoke pours, cables sing, and the carcass leaves the frame like a stagehand pulling scenery. Hours later, the same silhouette returns, with a drier engine note and tighter flanks. The map square that should have gone cold warms again without asking permission. The next failure is cartographic. German outposts always marked dead tanks with confidence, sketched arcs based on a fixed obstacle, and the way men must move around a husk of steel. Now the mark cannot be trusted. Pencil lines smudge under rain because the thing that made them meaningful has been towed, stripped, and returned. A gun captain who loved angles watches his known shot evaporate because the landmark he used for calculation is gone. He drags the trail 10 centimeters across warped boards and loses the court he thought he owned. Language in mouth and margin changes shape. A company memo that once praised daylight corner work starts using phrases that taste like old coins. Avoid, preserve, economy of force. The loud verbs go. The quiet verbs breed. Battalion scribbles add a line underlined twice. Do not count American KO as permanent. A Panther commander who grew up on hunting nouns finds his day managed by the grammar of caution. He asks for smoke, not to pounce but to back away. He looks at a corner he would have owned and imagines the tow chain that will undress his victory before dusk. 2 blocks over the second proof arrives, as if the street has decided to show a man his blind spot twice. A Sherman throws a track into the slit of a sunk rail and slumps. The pack team has the angle and the habit. They put a round into the sprocket they can see like an animal showing its throat. The finish is routine, or would be, if routine still lived here. Smoke punches low and thick. A recovery tank plants its nose on a manhole rim, and the cable hum sounds like a violin that only knows one note. A platoon from the 104th climbs a stairwell they chalked yesterday and denies a Panzer Faust his picture. The wreck rounds a corner and becomes freight. By the time a sentry swaps his strap, the same runner passes under the same exposed balcony. The gun crew upstairs moves again because the old geometry refuses to stay drawn. Inside German crews, the collapse is a sensation before it is a sentence. The Panther gunner still has a bright sight picture at the end of a straight. He still has steel and velocity to sell. What he does not have is the dividend of time. Each hit he scores returns less interest. A round that should have bought an afternoon buys a tow that should have been a night's reprieve buys an hour. His commander senses it in the way orders come wrapped in caveats. Hold fire. Conserve. Do not trade the irreplaceable for the temporary. He recognizes the truth and dislikes the taste. He was taught to hunt. He is being asked to curate. On the American side, myth does not burst. It drains. Men do not claim invulnerability. They accept procedure. The difference is not bravado, but a clock. Mobility kill triggers a schedule that recruits artillery, infantry, and machines into a narrow choreography. Smoke falls. A hook man moves in a crouch with a rope across his shoulder, while another hand on his back keeps him from vanishing. A driver sets a nose against a curb lip, with both pedals down to hold geometry while the winch does its work. The forward bay lives close enough to hear rifle fire and organizes itself for time final drives staged by Fiel engine packs, run on stands and left warm tool carts arranged to match how tired fingers reach. Cannibalization becomes a choice, not a sin, when it shaves hours off a return. A crew without a hull rides a reserve without sulk. The net says runner back and a platoon shifts without drama, because last night it meant exactly what it said. The German myth of the fixed obstacle dies in paperwork. A platoon leader tries to write the words, destroyed enemy tank used as cover, and cannot keep the letters from feeling dishonest. He has seen 3 corpses leave the field before he could exploit them. He writes instead that mobile enemy repair erases landmarks and requests mines he can trust and darkness he can own. Darkness itself is thin and fickle. Rails are broken in places. Trains that once hauled wounded heavies now carry rumours. Daylight recovery is risk his system cannot afford. A heavy left in place risks becoming a beacon. A heavy pulled by day risks becoming a news item. Neither option pays. At the edge of each hour, the city offers proof again. A Panther puts a round through a plate and watches dust drift in pretty shafts. He listens for the long quiet that used to follow, and hears instead the scratch of chains, the cough of a fresh block catching the buzz of a 50 kissing a likely window. The first shot remains violent and convincing. The time after the shot refuses to obey. Somewhere, a company-grade order strips Daylight Corner fights out of the approved menu unless ambush conditions are perfect and the route out is chalked ahead. Men who once were sent to make noise are sent to make absence. They do not like the new assignments. They obey them because spares are far and trained crews are rare. If myth had a calendar, the point of no return would be the day a commander stopped teaching his men to plan a day around a knocked-out enemy and began teaching them to expect that enemy back before they finished their bread. It would be the day an outpost scratched out a kill mark before the shift changed. It would be the day an artillery observer treated a tow as the most dangerous moment in a block and planned fire for that moment as a matter of routine. It would feel like this week. For Americans, the new normal hardens into bone. Acquire first, relocate instantly, smoke on contact, pull, swap, return. The riflemen add habits as invisible armor. Clear stairwells on tow routes, pre-check basements for doors that open into alleys, keep eyes on second-story silhouettes shaped like tubes. Mechanics trim minutes off lash by listening to a sound they did not know last month. A maintenance lieutenant scratches a number on a panel with a grease pencil, and that number becomes a promise a platoon can trust more than a speech. The most important words stay short. Mobility kill. Smoke down. M32 rolling. Hook set. Winch. Move. Runner back. Shift left. Watch Fausts. Across the street, the Germans speak more and say less. Their optics are still beautiful. Their guns still strike true. Their crews still know where to put a hole to make a machine limp. But beauty does not multiply. Truth does not replenish. Knowledge without time solves nothing. A panther preserved is a panther unused. A pack moved after one shot is a pack that teaches nobody how to fear a corner. Men begin to believe in night as a kind of mercy. They begin to use the word preserve about themselves and their machines. The tone of their voices hardens into something like bitterness when they report a kill as an event without consequence. The city learns the new rule before the men have time to explain it to themselves. Corners stop being named after burned hulls. They are named after doors that do not move and poles sunk deep into old concrete. Tow routes gain their own folklore. The sound of a chain becomes an omen. The smell of damp felt and hot oil means a runner will be back. The click of cooling armor no longer closes a story. It pauses a scene. By the end of the week, the line between pressure and preservation is bright. One side spends parts to earn hours. The other spends hours to save parts. The first keeps momentum by making repairs keep up. The second loses momentum by guarding the conditions under which its strengths once mattered. Men on both sides feel the change in their hands before they admit it with their mouths. The myth that once bought time with a single clean shot folds at the pace of a tow cable unspooling to the ground. That was the last day one shot bought time. After that, it only bought a tow.